संस्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय Ramakrishnaaya te namaha. In last week's lecture, I started talking about Sri Ramakrishna's divine humor. It was part 1, and today I'll complete that lecture. It's part 2 of the same lecture. And last week I mentioned that I wanted to focus on 3 different ways that Sri Ramakrishna uses humor as found in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, the Kathamrita. Last week, I talked about the first way, the way that he uses humor to explain in a very simple way, very difficult and very profound spiritual and philosophical ideas. But I mentioned last week that there are 2 other ways. There are many ways that he uses humor, but I wanted to focus on 3 ways. Last week, I focused on 1 way, and in this lecture, I wanted to discuss 2 other ways that Sri Ramakrishna uses humor towards spiritual ends. So the second way is, in many places in the Kathamrita, in the Gospel, you'll find that Sri Ramakrishna uses humor as a way of gently or indirectly scolding a particular person. Not in a bad way, not in a kind of in a way that will hurt the person, but in a way that will help him or her make spiritual progress. So I'll give a few examples of that. So for instance, on one occasion, one of his visitors was named Jodu Mollik. He was a very wealthy devotee of Sri Ramakrishna, and he would sometimes visit Sri Ramakrishna. So this wealthy Jodu Mollik came to Dakshineshwar to visit him, and he came with a whole group of people that were surrounding him. And then Sri Ramakrishna says, I'll read this directly from the Gospel, Sri Ramakrishna, with a smile, "Why do you keep so many clowns and flatterers with you?" And then Jodu, smiling, "That you may liberate them," laughter. And then Sri Ramakrishna says, "Flatterers think that the rich man will loosen his purse strings for them, but it is very difficult to get anything from him. Once a jackal saw a bullock and would not give up his company. The bullock roamed about and the jackal followed him. The jackal thought, 'There hang the bullock's testicles. Sometime or other they will drop to the ground and I shall eat them.' When the bullock slept on the ground, the jackal lay down too. And when the bullock moved about, the jackal followed him. Many days passed in this way, but the bullock's testicles still clung to his body. The jackal went away disappointed." All laugh. That also happens to flatterers. So Sri Ramakrishna, through this humorous kind of story/joke, he's doing several things. On the one hand, he's criticizing Jodu's flatterers because they're there for the wrong reasons. They're only there because they want Jodu's money. And at the same time, Sri Ramakrishna knows that Jodu Mollik is, in his heart, he's a sincere spiritual aspirant. So he's telling Jodu, "Why are you so preoccupied with gathering flatterers around you? It's a very vain kind of activity. You shouldn't be so interested in having these kinds of flatterers. It's affecting your spiritual life." But he says this in such an indirect way that he doesn't do it to hurt the person. He does it to give them a kind of spiritual uplift. Another example, on another occasion, a particular person comes to visit Sri Ramakrishna, a stranger. Basically, Sri Ramakrishna had never met him, and that person also had never met Sri Ramakrishna. And that person was wearing gedua, sannyasi's clothes. So that's the background. So this is what is said in the Gospel. An unknown Bengali, dressed in the ochre cloth of a monk, entered the room and sat on the floor. The master's mind was coming down to the ordinary plane of consciousness. Presently he began to talk, though the spell of samadhi still lingered. Sri Ramakrishna, at the sight of the ochre cloth, "Why this gedua? Should one put on such a thing for a mere fancy? A man once said, 'I have exchanged the Chandi for a drum.' At first he used to sing the holy songs of the Chandi. Now he beats the drum." All laugh. There are 3 or 4 varieties of renunciation. Afflicted with miseries at home, one may put on the ochre cloth of a monk, but that renunciation does not last long. Again, a man out of work puts on an ochre wearing cloth and goes off to Benares. After 3 months, he writes home, "I have a job here. I shall come home in a few days. Don't worry about me." Again, a man may have everything he wants. He lacks nothing. Yet he does not enjoy his possessions. He weeps for God alone. That is real renunciation. No lie of any sort is good. A false garb, even though a holy one, is not good. If the outer garb does not correspond to the inner thought, it gradually brings ruin. So Sri Ramakrishna here, even though he has never met this person before, he was at a very high state of spiritual consciousness. He was just coming down from samadhi, and he immediately saw that this person was not actually a sadhu, but he was wearing a sadhu's clothes. And the way that Sri Ramakrishna gently scolded him was by giving this kind of little story. This person who says, "I've exchanged the chandi for a drum." So what does he mean by this? "I've exchanged the chandi for a drum." And why does he say this in this particular context? One thing I should mention in the Leela Prasanga, written by Swami Sharadananda, the biography of Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, there's a quotation from Swami Vivekananda. Vivekananda says, one can write shelves of philosophical books on the basis of any one of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings. And I think this is an example of that. Each one of us, when we read this incident in the gospel, we may have different interpretations. Why exactly does Sri Ramakrishna use this example of the chandi and the drum in the context of this person wearing girua, who's not a sadhu? But I have just one suggestion, and you can think for yourselves about it. But the idea that I came up with is that Sri Ramakrishna seems to be saying, see, the person who was originally singing holy songs from the chandi and then gives up that chandi in exchange for the chandi, just takes a drum, he's likening the person singing the holy songs to the pious householder, the person who, as a householder, who has a spouse, who has children, who has a 9-to-5 job and gets a salary, but that person who offers everything he or she does to God, that person is much more spiritual than the person who is just wearing the external garb of a sadhu, but internally is still full of worldly thoughts. So Sri Ramakrishna says, instead of showing that you're very spiritual, you should try to cultivate spirituality within and not try to show off to other people. And at the same time, you notice that just after he mentioned this thing about the chandi and the drum, he makes a more general point that's not just for the benefit of that one particular person, but for all of his visitors, where he explains there are different kinds of renunciation, and the true renunciation is exhibited by the person who has everything, but renounces everything for the sake of God. So this is meant not just for that person, but for everybody in the room. So you can see how his humor has a kind of universal message. And I'll mention one more example of this second type of humor, the way that he uses humor to gently scold his visitors. On another occasion, Sri Ramakrishna himself mentions a time when he was speaking to Keshav Chandra Sen, who is a very famous bhakta and lecturer. So Sri Ramakrishna says, one day Keshav came here with his followers. They stayed till 10 at night. We were all seated in the Panchavati. Pratap Chandra Muzumdar, and several others said they would like to spend the night here. Keshav said, no, I must go. I have some work to do. I laughed and said, can't you sleep without the smell of your fish basket? Once a fishwife was a guest in the house of a gardener who raised flowers. She came there with her empty basket after selling fish in the market and was asked to sleep in a room where flowers were kept. But because of the fragrance of the flowers, she couldn't get to sleep for a long time. Her hostess saw her condition and said, hello, why are you tossing from side to side so restlessly? The fishwife said, I don't know, friend. Perhaps the smell of the flowers has been disturbing my sleep. Can you give me my fish basket? Perhaps that will put me to sleep. The basket was brought to her. She sprinkled water on it and set it near her nose. Then she fell sound asleep and snored all night. At this story, the followers of Keshav burst into loud laughter. So this is Sri Ramakrishna himself telling this story about the fisherwoman to Keshav himself and to his followers. So you find, here's another example where Sri Ramakrishna had this genius for storytelling. He would come up with a very dramatic and memorable kind of story to make a very spiritual point. The idea being that worldly people, and not even worldly people, but people who are sincere spiritual aspirants, sometimes what happens is their mind drifts towards worldliness. And it's very important that at that moment of temptation that you pull your mind back and that you, especially you can achieve this through sadhu sangha. And Sri Ramakrishna is saying, instead of staying here with me, you want to go back to your family and talk about worldly things again. And then but he says it in this indirect way so as not to hurt Keshav, but to still make the same spiritual point. So that's the second way. Now, what is the third way? The third way Sri Ramakrishna uses humor in the gospel is to express his love for the people visiting him, and as a way of cementing his own bonds with the people visiting him, and to bring other people together. So I want to just give two examples of this use of humor. So, on one occasion, this is the second time that Mohandranath Gupta, who's the author of the Gospel, it's the second time that Mohandranath Gupta comes to visit Sri Ramakrishna. And on this occasion, Sri Ramakrishna sees him, and immediately he says this. He says, "There, he has come again." And all the people there started laughing. And then Mohandranath Gupta, bowed low before Sri Ramakrishna and took a seat. Presently, the master explained the cause of his laughter to the devotees. Sri Ramakrishna said, "A man once fed a peacock with a pill of opium at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The next day, exactly at that time, the peacock came back. It had felt the intoxication of the drug and returned just in time to have another dose." All laugh. So this is an example of how Sri Ramakrishna uses a humorous kind of story about a peacock as a way of saying, "You are my very own." He's only met him twice. This is the second time that Sri Ramakrishna has met Mohandranath Gupta. But just from the very beginning, he makes him feel like one of his own family members by giving this little humorous story about the peacock coming back again for the same opium at the same time. And he does the same thing on many other occasions with different people. So just to give you one more example, on another occasion, a famous Pandit came to visit Sri Ramakrishna. And this is the second time that the same Pandit came to visit Sri Ramakrishna. So when Sri Ramakrishna noticed that this person came again, this Pandit, he tells this Pandit, "Come again. One hemp smoker rejoices in the company of another hemp smoker. They even embrace each other, but they hide at the sight of people not of their own kind. A cow licks the body of her calf, but she threatens a strange cow with her horns." All laugh. So again, this is just, he's using humor as a way of telling him, "You are my very own. And please come again. Don't feel like you're a stranger. Don't feel shy about coming to me." And one more example. This is a very interesting example. So Keshab Chandra Sen, he was a very famous leader of the Brahma Samaj, of one particular group of the Brahma Samaj. And one of the famous members of Keshav's organization, Vijay Krishna Goswami, he got in a bit of an argument with Keshab, and eventually he broke off from Keshav's organization and started his own. And Sri Ramakrishna knew all this background, and he knew that there's a lot of tension and infighting between Keshab and Vijay. And both of them happened to visit him one day. So both Keshab was there and Vijay was there in Dakshineshwar. And so Sri Ramakrishna tells him, actually Mohandranath Gupta is explaining this incident. So Gupta says, Sri Ramakrishna noticed that Keshab and Vijay rather shrank from each other, and he was anxious to reconcile them. So notice how Sri Ramakrishna uses humor to bring Keshab and Vijay together. So Sri Ramakrishna tells Keshab, "Look here, there is Vijay. Your quarrel seems like the fight between Shiva and Rama. Shiva was Rama's guru. Though they fought with each other, yet they soon came to terms. But the grimaces of the ghosts, the followers of Shiva, and the gibberish of the monkeys, the followers of Rama, would not come to an end." Loud laughter. Ramanuja upheld the doctrine of Vishishtadvaita, qualified non-dualism, but his guru was a pure non-dualist, an Advaitin. They disagreed with each other and refuted each other's arguments. That always happens. Still, to the teacher, the disciple is his own. So this is what Sri Ramakrishna is telling Keshav. Found point, a very wise point about their followers. Just as the followers, even though after Shiva and Rama became friends again, the followers of Shiva and the followers of Rama were still quarreling. He's indirectly saying that, look, even many days after you and Vijay will get along and become friends again, your followers and Vijay's followers will be continuing to fight for many, many years, which is actually turned out to be true. So he's making a very profound point at the same time, through humor. So he uses humor in so many different ways. One thing that Swami Medhanandaji mentions in his own lectures is that through reading the gospel, we should try to practice Sri Ramakrishna Sannidhya sadhana, which means the sadhana of feeling a closeness and proximity to Sri Ramakrishna. And one of the ways that Sri Ramakrishna in the gospel makes us feel like his very own, and makes us feel that we're present on that occasion, even though these events took place in the 1800s. one of the ways that he makes us feel that he's directly talking to us is through his humor. It's not a dry text. So whenever we read it and the people there are laughing, he's making jokes, he's smiling, we also feel that we're one of them. We're one of that party who are visiting him in Dakshineshwar. And that's a very powerful spiritual practice. So let us pray to Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother Sharada Devi, and Swami Vivekananda, that through reverential study and reading of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, that we can develop love for Sri Ramakrishna and realize him in this very life. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.